Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam kebajikan, nama budaya, Om Swastiastu. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's being a great honor for me, Violeta Susanto, to be your Master of Ceremony, and welcome each and every one of you in webinar, The Future of International Taxation During the Pandemic. Over the next few hours, this webinar will provide you plenty of opportunities to discuss, share knowledge and insights talking about international taxation. We also like to express our sincere gratitude to the Honorable Mr. Rahmadi Murwanto as Director Politeknik of State Finance Staff, the Honorable Mr. John L. Hutagaol as Director of International Taxation of Directorate General Taxes, the Honorable Mr. Andre Auerbach, the Honorable Ms. Gitte Heij, and all audiences. We thank God Almighty because our blessings and graces we can gather at this event with healthy condition. Before we started this webinar, let us pray in accordance with trust respectively. May God make this rewarding event for all of us, and the event will run smoothly and conducive. Pray start on individual beliefs begins. Enough? So to open this webinar, there will be an opening speech that delivered by Director of Politeknik of State Finance Staff. Please welcome Mr. Rahmadi Murwanto.
Thank you, MC. Good morning to you all. Dear all distinguished speakers, Bapak John Hutagaol, my friend and also the Director of International Taxation of Directorate General of Taxes, Mr. Andrew Auerbach. My apology if I'm not saying it correctly. Currently, the Senior Advisor of OECD in Jakarta, and Ms. Gitte Heij, I'm sorry if I'm not saying it correctly, Senior Associate from the University of Melbourne, and also all participants. I'm pleased to welcome you to this International Taxation webinar. The COVID-19 pandemic has put a lot of pressure on the global economy, including Indonesia. Indonesia could not escape from the impacts of pandemic. The economic growth of Indonesia in the second quarter this year contracted by 5.32% on year basis. This figure worsened from the previous quarter in 2020 that was registered at 2.97%. The global recession was further predicted to be more severe than the global financial crisis in 2008. This condition is likely to hit all of the economic layers, including multinational companies, whose income which experienced a significant decline. It will also certainly affect the transfer pricing policy, analysis and documentation of company group affiliation transaction reports. To counteract the negative impact of COVID-19 pandemic on the economy, many countries in the world simultaneously implemented various economic stimulus. Likewise, Indonesia, following the government's policy to allocate an additional budget of 405 trillion rupiah to stimulate the economy. Tax incentive package, of course, is a part of the massive stimulus policy. However, Indonesia also takes this moment to accelerate the fair taxation policy, especially when it comes to digital economy taxation. In fact, during this pandemic, digital transaction has increased significantly. Recent economic dynamics and global stimulus policies, especially with the COVID-19 pandemic, are interesting topics to discuss, especially related to the international transaction practices that will more or less be affected by the global crisis. In this regard, this webinar aims to present a multi-perspective discussion. International tax would not only deal with our domestic agenda, but also we need to cope with the global issue, which may need a mutual cooperation between countries and international organizations. More importantly, the OECD. Last but not least, I also hope that an academic perspective would be meaningful insight. I believe that by participating in this webinar, we are in the right place and in the right time. I'm confident that you will find new insights on the direction of international taxation policy considering these pandemic situations, which may severely affect the global economy. To Bapak John Hutagaol, Mr. Andrew Auerbach, and Ms. Gitte Heij, I hope that this webinar will bring a good cooperation in the future between PKN, Directorate General of Taxes, OECD, and the University of Melbourne. Thank you for sharing your knowledge. Lastly, I wish you all enjoy this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Serge, for the awesome opening speech. So moving right along, there will be 3 different discussions given by the Excellencies guest speakers as today's agenda. To all audiences, you may turn on your camera, but please mute your audio. You may also ask questions after the discussions. The discussion that talks about the main topic, international taxation in response to global pandemic of COVID-19, will be led by Mr. Ferry Irawan as our moderator today. Mr. Ferry Irawan currently works for Politeknik of State Finance as a full-time faculty member. Graduated from National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies in Japan as a Master Public Policy, he has experienced many roles in Directorate General of Taxes, such as transfer pricing and tax policy analyst, also member of Mutual Agreement Procedure and Advanced Pricing Agreement. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Ferry Irawan.
Thank you, Fio. Thank you, Fio. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning. The COVID-19 pandemic broke out at a time when there were heightened uncertainties in the global economy. Understanding these uncertainties provides an important background for analyzing the impact of the pandemic on the global economy. Assessing the effectiveness of policy measures in combating the pandemic and reviving the global economy, and predicting the trajectory of the economic recovery in the post-pandemic era. We are going to discuss it from the international tax perspective. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the webinar, Masa Depan Perpajakan Internasional di Tengah Pandemi, or so-called the future of international taxation in the middle of COVID pandemic. Thank you all for finding time and visiting today's webinar. My name is Ferry Irawan, and I will serving as your moderator today. First of all, I would like to thank to our distinguished speakers for today's webinar. First is Mr. Andrew Auerbach, Senior Policy Advisor from OECD Jakarta office. And the second one is Dr. Gitte Heij, Senior Associate, Asian Law Center from University of Melbourne. And Dr. John Hutagaol, Director of International Taxation, Gitte, Indonesia. To getting know deeper about our speakers today, I will read their curriculum vitae. Previously, allow me to greet our speakers. Good morning, Pak Andrew. Good morning, Dr. Gitte, and good morning, Pak John. Nice to meeting you all in this great event. Okay, now I will introduce you our first speaker. He's Mr. Andrew Auerbach. He is now an OECD tax representative in Southeast Asia, based in Jakarta. He is a check. I'm so sorry for the technical problem. So I will continue to the second speaker, curriculum vitae. She's Dr. Gitte Heij, Senior Associate at Sir Walter Murdoch School of Public Policy and International Affairs. Dr. Gitte has a master degree in tax law from the University of the Groningen and PhD in law from the same university in the Netherlands. Gitte worked at the Asia Risk and Investment Topics in Southeast Asia. Over the last 20 years, she has been involved in various multi and bilateral aid projects. Dr. Gitte Heij is a senior associate at the Sir Walter Murdoch School of Public Policy and International Affairs. In 2014, she completed her grad cert in Strategic Foresight, University of Houston, followed by Cert of Achievement in Strategic Foresight, University of Houston in 2016, for her research work on the future of tax laws in an increasing globalized and unequal world. She has a track record of teaching in international tax law and development aid. And our third speaker is Professor Dr. John Hutagaol. He is now act as a Director of International Taxation. He was born in Jakarta, November 27, 1965. He has a lot of experience in DGT, such as Head Office of Foreign Direct Investment 1, and then Expert of Taxation Services, Experts on Taxation Law Enforcement, Director of Tax Regulation, and Director of International Taxation. He graduated from Universitas Pajajaran Bandung in Business Management for PhD degree, and Master of Economics by Research from University of Macquarie, Sydney, Australia, and Master of Economics in Accountancy, University of Macquarie, Sydney, Australia, and Bachelor of Jaya, Malang, Indonesia. So we have a very experienced speaker for today. And before we start, please allow me to explain how you can talk to us during this webinar. If you have any questions during the presentation, just write them on the chat. And also the materials will be given to the participant after the webinar has finished. Okay, and now here's our special guest, Mr. Andrew Auerbach. Andrew, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Selamat pagi. Very, very pleased to be here. Thank you to Director Marwanto, moderator, Ferry. I haven't had the pleasure of meeting Ms. Gitte Heij, but I'm pleased to be on the panel with her this morning. And of course, thank you to John Hutagaol, whom I've worked very closely with in my time here in Indonesia. I've been here about a year, so I'm starting to get maybe the hang of things. I've been at the OECD for about 12 years and working in international tax, so I'm very happy to be giving my my views here on the COVID pandemic and the impact for international taxation. I will just try and share my screen if I can, and I think we have it. Do you see the presentation there? Good. Okay.
Yes, yes, Andrew. It's
You know, I think the message here, we could of course talk for days about about international tax and a lot of aspects. We have I have a short amount of time, and I think I just wanted to maybe emphasize from the beginning that the main message is that the COVID pandemic is absolutely affecting everybody globally, and it's very much a situation where we're all in it together, I think, and that we're all kind of learning as we go. It's been an incredible challenge for policymakers, for tax administrators, I'm sure for tax practitioners, and of course it's giving a lot of food for thought for tax academics to try and understand what this means for international policy. From the Center for Tax Policy's point of view, of course, the OECD has been at the center of international tax matters over the past decade, and we've built institutions that cover not just OECD members, which are only about 37 in the world, but in tax matters, we have a very inclusive institution on base erosion and profit shifting, which includes almost 140 members. And we have 160 members in our Global Forum on Transparency. And so we serve all those members. And in the context of the pandemic, we've been doing a lot of work, both to track policy across the world, what jurisdictions are doing, to report to the G20 on what the situation looks like. Our Forum on Tax Administration has been working on supporting administrations in how to deal with the pandemic, and we've been making recommendations on specific cross-border issues that arise in these special circumstances. I think maybe to take a step back, and Ferry has already hinted, and also Director Maranto has hinted on the significance of the crisis, but maybe just to give some idea about what we're kind of dealing with here. And I think in maybe the first aspect of it is, it's difficult to know where we are in this particular challenge, but one thing we know is it's a marathon, not a sprint. And I think maybe if you kind of cast your mind back to March or April, when people might have thought, well, things will get bad, but then we'll be back to work normally in a month or two, and everything will be fine. And we know now that's not the case. In fact, if you'd asked me about a month ago what the situation was like in France or in Europe, the message might have been, oh, it's pretty good, it's getting better, things are getting back to normal. But today, of course, they're reporting even more cases than ever. So, but despite all that, it's helpful to think about the pandemic in the context of, phases: containment, living with it and trying to start things up, and then getting into a kind of phase 3 of post-pandemic, or where we have a treatment. And in all those circumstances, I think, it's hard to know where we are. And for that reason, it's extremely important to be agile and flexible in terms of the policy responses. I think it's very important to keep the kind of historical perspective in mind. And this chart, I think, is as stark you know, impressive and frankly scary as you can imagine, because if we're going back to 1970 and looking at where you know, where GDP has tracked, and it's pretty much been positive, and we see a couple of you know, a couple of problems here and there. Notably in 2008, you know, and for those of you who remember the global financial crisis, I think we all thought that was about the end of the international economy. I mean, it was worse than anything we'd seen. And yet here we are in 2020, quarter two, and it far outweighs the devastation economically has been absolutely historic. And I think it's important that we all realize that this is really a moment in history, and coming back out of it will require a monumental effort across the globe. I think the OECD annually, we predict, try and predict, you know, where the international economy is going. Normally, we provide a you know, a scenario based on our best projections. Uniquely in 2020, we have provided two scenarios because we're not sure. Our economists are not sure, will there be a single hit, or will there be a kind of second wave where there's a second lockdown, where there's the economic activity has to plunge again. And so we've done two numbers, and if you see the tracked lines here, we had projected, you know, world GDP to grow in the 5% range. We're now looking at the -5, a swing of about 10% in a double hit scenario. Now, I think these projections were made, you know, middle of the year. Again, you know, 2 months later, I'm not sure what the projections would be now. Are we in the second hit scenario, or are we still in the first hit and the second hits to come? I think, you know, economists will be able to debate the issue, and so we have to remain flexible. In Indonesia, of course, it's been very, you know, very significant impact. You know, big hit on tourism. I actually managed to make it to Bali for a couple of weeks this summer, and there are places in Bali absolutely deserted where they would have been, you know, full of tourists, and so it's very, very, very evident, and people really are struggling very, very hard. If we look at the G20 and the economic outlook, here, you know, Indonesia on the far right of the scale is doing better than a lot of G20 countries. If you look at France, Spain, Italy, extremely hard hit, but the message is not positive for anybody. And so I guess just to reinforce, you know, what I mentioned at the beginning, which is that we really are all in this together, and it's going to be something that if we're going to come out of it, we need to come out of it together. I wanted to just if I can arrange my screen here again, sort of go back to some of the things that we've been doing in the Center for Tax Policy. We've been tracking the tax policy measures. It's extremely important and valuable, I think, for tax administrations, for tax policy people, even for practitioners, to know what's going on in the world. There's been an enormous amount of stimulus provided to economies to try and keep things going. To try and keep taxpayers afloat, businesses afloat, and knowing what's going on in other jurisdictions is crucial. The short-term responses, you know, what fiscal consolidation will look like down the road, how these things track out. So we're keeping track of this, and we have a database that's available there for everybody that tracks the measures going on in over 100 jurisdictions. We've reported to the G20 based on that information on what's going on around the world to give a sense of direction. This is now going back a few months, and so I think if we looked at it again, you know, we'd have to say we're kind of taking a step back. But I think the overall message is that what what we see governments doing is they really want to ensure that there's confidence, maintain confidence in the economy, maintain confidence in the government to provide the support that the taxpayers need, to provide the resilience to the economy. Going back to the kind of three stages, phase one, phase two, phase three, and what that means for tax policy responses is that, we have the outbreak, we have the containment, and hopefully a transition to post-pandemic. In these, you have to have an immediate response, and we've been through that sort of phase one. Are we still at the tail end of that, or are we in the cushioning the impacts and preserving capacity? I think it's a bit of a blurry line, and the distinguishing feature really is you go from a liquidity problem to a solvency problem. And one thing, it's keeping cash going in the economy so that people can pay their bills, but at some point, can businesses stay afloat? Because if they can't, then the recovery is going to be that much harder. It's going to be that much more slow to kind of get things back once we do get back to a kind of quasi-normal or new normal. At the end, when we have a post-pandemic, debt is going to be an issue. Debt is going to be a huge issue for corporations, for governments. We know, of course, in Indonesia that the debt limit has been raised extraordinarily. That's the case in a lot of countries, and revenue is going to be key to maintaining that. So I think just seeing how the gears work, there's the emergency and the recovery. In the emergency, our advice is you really can't spend too much. The risk of erring on the side of spending too little is too great. And by the same token, recovery is going to be slow and uncertain, and it's very important not to withdraw support too soon. Also long term, and it's hard sometimes to think about long term when we're really sort of not sure even what the moment is looking like. But I think it's important to start planning for the long term, but also to align the recovery with long term plans, and that's something that each government will have to face. Tax administration is a key component of this. I mean, we've said, and I think it's clear for all governments that you got to spend a lot, and Indonesia is a country that has, taken the steps necessary to get the cash available to help businesses, particularly SMEs, individual taxpayers. But one of the problems you're facing, and I think this is true in a lot of places, is actually getting the money spent, actually getting the money into the hands of people. And the tax administrations play a crucial role there. And so we've done a lot of work with the Forum on Tax Administration to support, measures to support taxpayers, to get cash into their hands, but also business continuity. Like, how do you keep, the lights on and make sure you can still deliver services and make sure that the spending is effective. And this is something that I think not, Indonesia struggles with it, but a lot of countries around the world. This is a global problem. Now there are a number of things that come up very specifically in the COVID situation that are extraordinary, circumstances that businesses, taxpayers did not predict, and they affect the application of tax treaties. So this is an area where, in the international sphere, tax practitioners, taxpayers are going to have to deal with these specific circumstances. And so we have issued guidance, and this is something to assist people that are affected by it. But I should stress a couple of things. Number one, it's guidance by the Secretariat about tax treaties in general. So it's not about individual tax treaties, and every government's going to have to look at the terms of those in particular, and the circumstances will change with time. This advice was issued in maybe a little bit earlier on, and we had some kind of cause to think about what happens in exceptional and temporary circumstances. And you know, that was at a time when the COVID was a couple of months old, for example. But now that the COVID is 6 months old and things have changed for a longer period of time, well, you know, what is exceptional, what is temporary in the context of a tax year changes. But nevertheless, we have issued guidance. I won't dwell on the specifics, of course, happy to answer any questions. But obviously, this question of permanent establishment will be impacted if businesses have employees in particular places longer than they thought or not as long as they thought. If they're concluding contracts in circumstances where they might not have had to conclude them. In other circumstances, construction may have halted over this period of time. What does that mean for a taxpayer? And so, again, we have guidance based on, you know, exceptional and temporary. After 3 months, maybe that's one thing. After 6 months, after 9 months, you know, I think everybody's going to have to figure out how these issues apply to them in particular. Similarly, in the case of residents of a company, of individuals, people who have been trapped places, you know, staying in Indonesia, there was an extension, for example, to the visas, so people stayed here longer than they might have thought. So how does the treaty apply to them? If they're still here, you know, then what is the scenario? So there are all these issues, and I think, you know, this is going to be another one of the lingering effects of the COVID pandemic. You know, as things become, as fiscal year 20 becomes audited in next year and the years after, these issues will continue to play a role. Transfer pricing, of course, is a key international tax, you know, part of the tax fabric, and crucial to any multinational business, will be a big part of a tax administration's audit function. And COVID is creating novel transfer pricing issues for taxpayers and tax administrations. We are working on trying to explore guidance. That's a little bit trickier. We have input from stakeholders, and we're getting it all the time. Some of the issues that we look at here, how to treat government assistance, advanced pricing agreements, have critical assumptions been breached so that the APA doesn't apply anymore? How to benchmark fiscal year 2020 will be a big challenge for tax administrations as they go forward. And there will be administrative issues. I mean, there are administrative issues right now in terms of ongoing audits. You know, do taxpayers have access to the documents? Can you audit in the same way? You know, dispute resolution timelines, you know, may have changed quite a lot. Your whole risk assessment function, I think, will be different. I mean, one of the things is you want to make sure that taxpayers are focused on keeping in business and not necessarily focused on defending their tax position right now. So there will be a lot of impact there. Now, I think, you know, kind of stepping back from all of that, we see governments that are coping with the pandemic on a whole range of levels. You know, both just the fiscal question, the business continuity issues, how to develop policies in the short term that fit with a long term, all in a context of a pandemic that we can't really predict. We don't know when there will be a vaccine. We don't know when we'll be back to new normal. When will everybody be able to go back to work? It is extremely challenging on all of those fronts. And this is why I think I want to stress, as I did at the beginning, but you know, that in that context, the kind of global institutions on tax really serve, I think, an important role in terms of making sure that governments stick together and have the best information that they need to make the policy choices that they're working on, And so seeing what's going on in maybe in the region, but also in other large G20 countries that are similar to Indonesia, you know, I mean, the policymakers here are going to have to make decisions, you know, based on the best information. A key to that is, I think, you know, when we look at the economic situation, is getting out of this is going to really demand that the world economy kind of get flowing again, that the supply chains get moving again. And so trade and investment will be key to the recovery. And so anything that that hampers that, I think, is going to be really problematic. And that really brings me to the question of digital and how it maybe fits into the COVID circumstance. Of course, those who have been following the OECD on digital taxation have known this story has been going on for about 5 years and or more, really. I mean, there's a recognition, of course, that the business models in the modern economy really undermine fundamentally the basic rules of international taxation, such that, you know, people who should be paying tax in certain places aren't. You know, that rules about permanent establishment and physical connection with market jurisdictions, giving those markets a right to tax, you know, no longer hold so well. And so we need a solution to that. And the OECD has been working on that with the inclusive framework and its 137 members to try and deliver a solution. And our deadline for that was 2020. And that's something that had been predicted back in 2015 when the G20 and the OECD countries agreed the work on base erosion and profit shifting. We've been working on this and made a lot of progress. I think for those of you who followed it closely, if you think back to 2018, there was really not even, I think, at that stage, an agreement on what the problem was or whether there was a problem. And we've moved a long way from that to a circumstance where, you know, we agree that there is a problem, and we have the outline of a solution, which is basically a pillar one that would reallocate taxing rights and provide market jurisdictions with more taxing rights, and a pillar two that would provide a minimum tax to address any remaining base erosion profit shifting issues, so that there's a kind of minimum level of taxation for corporate profit around the world. Now, we had intended to deliver a solution to the G20 by the end of this year. The pandemic has diverted political attention and has slowed down the technical work. Of course, we've had to, just like everybody else, the OECD has not been working on the same kind of schedule as before. We've had to reorganize a lot of meetings. Of course, devoting attention to the COVID pandemic itself has taken a lot of resources. Nevertheless, we have advanced things, and even though we've delayed the kind of political decision from July to October, we have provided material to the inclusive framework for their consideration. We have a meeting in the beginning of October, and we hope to agree as much as we can a solution that will have the consensus globally. And what's at stake is, of course, without a consensus, there is not just, I think, the risk, but really the reality that individual unilateral actions on digital taxation will take place. A number of countries, including Indonesia, have already announced or enacted measures that have taken place or that will take place if there is no progress in the OECD. And we know of many more that are planning that. And we understand that there is a political reality. The COVID pandemic itself provides a huge need to generate revenue. A lot of the digital businesses, of course, are doing very well during the pandemic. It's not bad economic news for everybody. And so there's a real equity question and an opportunity question as well. Now, you will know, of course, that there are political issues here. The U.S. has suggested a pause to the negotiations on Pillar 1, that the COVID pandemic has made it difficult to agree these, that there are elections coming up in the United States, but Pillar 2 could be agreed, a kind of minimum tax. We don't all agree in the inclusive framework on how to decouple Pillar 1 and Pillar 2. They're kind of two pillars of one solution, and you can't have one without the other. Other people, have different views, and so what we're working on is to try and bridge these positions in the coming months. I guess we could call that the coming weeks at this point. We're almost in September. We have a meeting, as I mentioned, the beginning of October, where we hope to agree at least the broad strokes of the blueprints on Pillar 1 and Pillar 2, and report positively to the G20. But this has been, obviously difficult discussions, but difficult because it's a difficult issue, and it's a once in a lifetime chance and opportunity and moment to reorganize the international tax rules to reflect current economic reality. And I think the COVID pandemic has just made that necessity and that imperative even more acute. And so, looking at how we come out of this pandemic and this economic crisis to a recovery point, we think that global consensus is a really important feature, and without it, I think the recovery will be that much more difficult. So please keep an eye on the discussions. There will be more in the news. Of course, if you've been following, you know that the blueprint on Pillar 1 has been shared a little bit ahead of time by somebody, and has been the subject of a lot of media commentary. But you should be seeing, more material there in the coming weeks and months as the inclusive framework discusses these and hopefully agree in the beginning of October. So I think I'm basically out of time here. I think we could talk a lot, but I'm very keen to hear the views of my colleague Ms. Heij and Pak John. So I turn it back to the moderator and thank you for the time, and look forward to answering any questions you have. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. That was a very amazing presentation, and I think it's quite interesting materials that you delivered. And now let's move on to our next speaker, is Dr. Gitte. Okay, please welcome Dr. Gitte.
Thank you so much. First of all, can everyone hear me?
Yes, doctor. Yes,
okay.
We can hear you clearly. Okay.
I'm going to put something in the chat link, and that is for those who want to actually be very interactive right now. I set up something I will show on the screen, if you can share the screen. Look. Okay, this is a certain software package. So before I do formal opening, I want everyone to be aware of this. You can actually, at the bottom of each post, you can add a comment that you think this is a really strange thought, or that makes me think, or if you want to add information, or if you want to do things with this. I leave it open. It's free to everyone who participates in this event this morning, and I look forward to see some comments in there for those who want it. So that's the chat. Now, before we start, I want to thank the organizers, and particularly the institute is organizing this. We try to have such a seminar for quite some time, and due to COVID, this didn't work. So here we are today, and it's an immense honor to speak here. And thank you so much for quite a surprising, open and honest presentation by Andrew Auerbach. I have to say this is something for me that I need to definitely look at my assumptions, because I thought it was such a realistic speech. So thank you for that. That is absolutely awesome. And I, of course, am starting this speech knowing that Pak Hutagaol is after me, and that makes me shake, because I know him from way back and he wouldn't remember me, but I know what caliber he has. So it's hard to compete with that. I just finished a 3-day seminar. I am not only a researcher and an academic, I'm a passionate futurist and a passionate international tax lawyer, and I'm the executive chair of Kappa Build, and Kappa Build is a private public initiative. It's a not-for-profit foundation that assists tax training academies in low and middle income countries. And we just had 3-day training with FETA and 8 different departments. So that is the work that really warms my heart. What is a futurist? A futurist is someone who is not predicting the future. We never say we predict. Foresight or futurism, people call it both, is more or less the same. We say we do not know what the future holds, so we are going to anticipate different possible futures. It may go one way, it may go another way. A lot of this is given. It is not something we can influence. We do have no choice in the matter when we describe the trends and the landscapes we see around us. But what we have is a choice what to do with what's given. Which way shall we turn, left or right? And I'll come back on that later in the presentation. So if I look at this, and this is Barack Obama. We did not come here to fear the future, we came here to shape it. And that's beautifully put. And when we do foresight, we often need to look at our assumptions. Our assumptions are, for everyone, they are different. And this picture shows it all. I made an assumption about Andrew Auerbach's speech that I thought it would be technical, but he brought in politics and that made it very realistic. I made an assumption that was not correct. We all do that because we don't know what we don't know. As a foresight person, I am a member of the OECD Government Foresight Group. I was invited to this group because I do work with the Australian government via the ATO. And when I am at the OECD, I often feel a bit lost, because the OECD actually has only 36 members. And there are roughly, if I'm not mistaken, 195 countries in this world. And these 36 countries at the OECD in Paris often think that the OECD is the world, but that's of course not true. The inclusive framework is not that all countries had the same say. No, that is a wrong assumption. They are sitting on the sideline, but they are not setting the agenda. We must not make assumptions there. We make a lot of assumptions, and it's confronting to see maybe we are wrong with what we assume. When we look around us, and previous speakers touched on this, we see a lot of different trends that actually may impact when we want to look at the future of tax. In foresight, we look from the outside in. So we do not look at what's happening in a government department or in a tax office, we look at what's happening on the outside that may actually impact our work. And there are many different factors that play a role. I did not make this beautiful picture. This comes from the UK Tax Revenue Services. They have a dedicated unit in Foresight led by Sue Evans. And they map out on a regular basis what they see as the drivers and trends that impact change. And then what does that mean for the tax office in the UK? This is an example of that. When we look at the future, we all have fears. I myself am not a big fan of technology. And I had to move from face-to-face training and meetings to the medium of online presenting. That is a hard one for me. I had to make a leap. We all have fears about the future, and they are real. We should never ignore our fears. But in order to think about the future and test our assumptions and really think it through, we need to put our fears aside for a moment and say, okay, let's just think freely. What is and isn't possible? In Foresight, we have to look at ourselves a lot, and we don't like that. But it's very important to know what is actually driving us. What do we want to achieve today, tomorrow, or in 10 years or 20 years? Foresighters love to know the timeline, and for everyone that's different. I come back to the issue of assumptions. For my husband, the timeline is, I've had breakfast, when is lunch? His timeline is 3 hours. Today we talk about COVID and maybe post-COVID. The timeline for what's happening in the coming year and make some possible futures around it is a hard one. Futurists like to look at a timeline of 10, 20, 50 years. Looking ahead 10 years is not that hard. Looking ahead for 6 or 12 months is hard. We must be very careful in our assumptions that we all agree on the timeline when we discuss the future of international tax. During the workshop earlier in the week, we did some exercises around possible scenarios. Futurists love scenarios. There are many methods, and scenarios is only one, but it's very thought-provoking. In here, we see a world in 2030, and we say, okay, imagine COVID is still here, and we have low economic growth. What are the upsides of that? We may think there are none. Maybe there are. What could they be, and how could they impact tax policy and tax revenue and tax administrations? It is very important to look at these different scenarios. We may not like them, but they're all plausible. This is me last year at a conference in Melbourne. I was one of the speakers. As you can see, I'm sitting at the far left and I'm bored. I'm very bored. Because this is an endless conference about transfer pricing, BEPS, OECD, Pillar 1, Pillar 2. And I've lost interest. Because as a futurist, I see very different things happening. And I think the attention should not be on these topics because they will be irrelevant in 10 years' time. I'll come back to that soon. We also see, when we look from the outside in, that power economic power and wealth sets a lot of the agenda. We see international trade agreements negotiated by powerful countries or powerful blocs like the EU, imposing restrictions on countries that do not have the same power. This is an example, and it impacts many countries. The cartoon is clear. Rich countries imposing environmental standards on poor countries, whilst the biggest emission didn't come from the group on the right here. It came clearly from the two fat cows on the left. This is a tweet I had. It's a painful tweet. I wrote, there are 195 countries in the world and only 36 are OECD members. How can they all claim, how can the OECD claim that we all committed to the OECD work? The head of the OECD came back, Pascal. I didn't write his name correctly, so I felt very embarrassed. And he wrote, Gitte, you may not know that tax matters are dealt with in the inclusive framework, which is OECD based, but has a much broader membership. All this can be easily found on a website. Pascal, for sure, didn't write this himself. He had what we call a content curator who probably wrote this rather patronizing answer. And I wrote back, thank you, Pascal. I'm very aware of tax matters being part of the inclusive frameworks. Even co-authored a paper about it, questioning how inclusive it truly is. I didn't hear anything back. I want to now move on to the Padlet link that I showed in the group discussion. So when I go there, here we are. There's a beautiful clip with the future vision by Ibu Sri Mulyani. It's a fantastic interview she gave last week with the Jakarta Post when they talked about the economy of Indonesia in 2030. It's beautiful. And now we come to assumptions. What can happen in the coming years? What happens if there is no cure for COVID? These are things we need to think through. What happens if we don't have a corporate tax? Many in rich countries in Europe agree with me. I think the end of corporate tax is in sight. There will be no corporate tax because the race to the bottom is clear. There is no consensus in sight, and that means countries keep competing, and tax lawyers and tax accountants who've made this their profession have eroded it so badly. And this is bad news, particularly for low and middle income countries that rely on corporate tax revenue. So we may have to look at other taxes. We also see, for example, that, and the previous speaker referred to this, imagine the OECD will not agree on Pillar 1 and 2. And not because there is no technical solution. Tax experts are very good at that. But we need 10 political scientists in the mix, because politically it's not going to happen. It's highly unlikely. And as referred to before, this will create chaos and everyone will do their own thing and are already doing so. You can't blame them. This is the reality. Unless there is a consensus, everyone will do their own thing. Or are there other alternatives? Could Southeast Asia join forces with Europe? Are these possible futures? There's a lot of focus on what the OECD is doing or may do or may not do. But of course, the world is bigger and the world is changing. There was a beautiful article that I downloaded so people can read it on this page about the 3 different blocks we see that really influence tax policy. The US wants its tech companies protected and taxed in the US. Europe is very focused on privacy, and China is very focused on surveillance. They are 3 very powerful blocks. What happens with those countries who are not part of these blocks? They may have to choose. You're either with us or not. If you're a Belt and Road country, China will exercise its power. If you're linked with your trade a lot to the US, you will feel the pressure, and you may not be able to do business with Europe unless you follow their privacy rules. These are real things. If there's no cure for COVID, what will the world look like? We will spend more time at home. We will have less activity. How would that work? These are very real questions we have to ask. For example, there's a wonderful podcast by Alison Christians. She's a very well-respected international tax lawyer. And she came up with a concept of Pillar 3. Forget Pillar 1 and 2, it's not going to work. But she came with a novel idea. We need lots of novel ideas to see through the future. So what do we see in the short term? In the short term, we'll see, of course, a loss in tax revenue. We see a lot of companies going bankrupt. But as we know, some of these companies were already in trouble. And now it's just made matters worse. It may not have the drastic impact on tax revenue in some countries because the companies that went under were already not fulfilling their tax compliance duties and weren't all that successful anyway. We see carry forward of tax losses. We see that if you're too lenient as tax authority, it comes back to bite you in 5 or 10 years' time when companies are still carrying forward losses whilst we are maybe in a post-COVID world. We will see that countries that can borrow do so because taking care of health is very important. Countries that can't really have a problem. And we see that too. And it's heartbreaking to see. I live in Australia and feel incredibly privileged. That is not the case for most people in this world. We may see more use of IT in collecting tax. We definitely will see an internet tax introduced or a digital tax introduced in most countries. Simply because we need to fund the future and we need to fund particularly healthcare at the moment. Is that the best solution? No. But when reports and advisors use the word should, and I make that mistake myself sometimes, then we have a problem. There are no shoulds. And we don't need to suck eggs, as we say in Australia, state the obvious. We do not want to state the obvious because we all know that. Countries, governments will do what's needed to create revenue. That may not be legally perfectly sound, but that's not the priority. Filling the coffers to help their people and prevent people dying from hunger or illness is most important. In the long term, we'll see a much broader focus on indirect taxes. So for the students here, you want to focus on an area where there's growth, dream up in this Padlet, in this sheet, write down what could be possible taxes of the future. We see environmental taxes coming in. We see the end of corporate tax. We see the introduction of digital taxes. We see increasing anger amongst voters that a Netflix may not pay its fair share. And when I say that, I am not referring to the $10, $20 or $30 you pay every month to watch detectives like I do. Netflix learns a lot about me. It's the very personal and private data that they have on me, from me, harvested here where I live as a resident. This is so big. It's not impossible that big tech will rule the world. It's a scenario we looked at in the workshop. What happens if big tech rules? Will Amazon come to the rescue when COVID has its next wave? No, it won't. It doesn't care. Big tech is a very dangerous thing, and countries think differently about it. But in the end, if there's no international solution, and that's highly unlikely, we all will do our own thing. Indirect taxes will be crucial. Integration between indirect taxes and direct taxes will become increasingly important, because then you can really see what a company is doing. We see more muscling of companies that are going to be in the top 10 economies in 2030. And Indonesia is in there. It's predicted to be the 4th largest economy. And that's fantastic news, because it can definitely have a stronger voice to defend its interests. Because a lot of companies see it as a great domestic market. These are the kind of trends we see. The challenge when we think about the future of international tax is not which taxes will take place and which will not. It is preparing ourselves for all possible futures, with global agreement or without. My thinking right now is it's very likely without, with corporate tax or without. Could be both. You prepare for all futures. My feeling is corporate tax will not live long. But we need to prepare for the different possibilities. And above all, we have a say in this. And that is very empowering. I would like to take comments now from the audience or questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Gitte. It's a very interesting presentation, I think. You give us another perspective. You know, I personally feel can find the cure for the COVID-19, but you also give us some, you take us to think more, or to analyze more how we deal or how we tackle the situation, and simple work to do. So we have to think together, if I'm not mistaken, from your presentation. Thank you one more time, Dr. Gitte. And now we move to our third speaker. Last but not least, Bapak Profesor Dr. John Hutagaol. Kepada Pak John, dengan hormat kami persilakan. Please, Pak John.
Hi, check. Hello. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
My name is Romario Rizkitala. You can call me Rio. On behalf of Pak John Hutagaol, I regret to inform you that Pak John is currently accompanying Pak Surya Utomo, our Director General of Tax, in another video conference. But he will join, he probably will join for the Q&A session. For the presentation, we have recorded his presentation, and that what I will show you right now. Keluar. Keluar. Keluar suaranya. Enggak. Coba lagi. Saya kedengeran, Pak. Hah? Ada suaranya. Sorry, I think I might need to increase the volume. No, not yet.
Ada kok. Nah, kamu bisa tanya nggak sama yang peserta? Kita paling nggak kedengaran. Iya. Bisa, mic-nya dari situnya Mas Rio soalnya. Apakah di nonaktifin jadi biar langsung ke dulu. Nah, terus. Bisa ya? Hah? Dari suara Bapak kedengaran kayaknya, tapi ini udah cabut ya. Dari ini audio GSMS sistem semua aja Mas. Sound eksternal yang keluar. Tes dulu mesin audionya. Aku ganti komputernya. Yang
Cek. Cek, mungkin mohon maaf, sorry for the inconvenience situation. Maybe there's a technical problem with the connections in head office of the GT. So maybe Q&A, recorded video. Maybe we can start with the Q&A. Is it okay, Pak Andrew and Dr. Gitte? Okay. Is it okay? Okay, thank you. Yeah. This is the first questions from Pak Nur Arif Nugraha. Okay, there's a question from Pak Nur Arif Nugraha. He's a lecturer from Pakistan. The pandemic COVID-19 has resulted a dilemma for every country to keep the balance between health and economy aspect. So how should the country do to formulate a proper tax policy, a potential economic recession that might occur? Maybe I will give the first chance to Pak Andrew. Maybe Pak Andrew can respond with the first question, Pak Andrew. Please feel free, Pak Andrew.
Yes. Do you see me? I guess, are we still looking at another screen?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, that's okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We can see you and we can hear you.
Okay. Thanks for the question, and thanks to Professor Heij for her presentation. I was very, very interested in it. I also had assumptions about what she was going to say, and they were wrong. So we're even on that score. But I think I will refer to Professor Heij's remarks about assumptions and imagining the future and how government should respond or plan, because the question about how do you balance the needs of society? I mean, the healthcare is a very short-term thing, but in the long term, what will that look like? I mean, and we can't forget that, okay, there's COVID-19 now. What's next year? What's 5 years from now? Is there some other kind of pandemic that will have? I mean, we need to build societies that are sustainable, and I think that's one of the messages that comes to governments, and something that I mentioned early on. And I know it's difficult to think about it, but thinking about the long term and thinking about sustainability and thinking about, well, okay, we have this terrible thing we have to deal with, but maybe this is an opportunity to reimagine what we could have and what we need. I mean, we're seeing now in a lot of jurisdictions, a lot of governments that the social safety net, in order to withstand the economic shocks and the human cost of this kind of event and others that may come in the future, aren't there. And so the long-term planning has to in some ways think about the value of that. I mean, we think about it, well, spending money to have unemployment benefits, or spending money to have healthcare, or spending money to have infrastructure is just spending. But it's also giving a value that has a kind of durable and lasting externality. So I think that look, I don't have the answer, but I think there are many ways in which governments have to make choices based on what they want to see in the long term.
Okay. Thank you, Pa Andrew. And maybe Dr. Gitte, you have respond to the questions.
Okay, may I share the screen again?
Yeah.
I want to show, we had a presentation. I will just see if I can quickly go. This was from the government of the UK. So they have a dedicated foresight unit led by Sue Evans. And this was one of the slides in the presentation. And so they really looked, oh, let me go back. they looked at what is happening in what are the 6 pillars that we look at when we talk about COVID. And this is, we see recession, we see unemployment, the future of work is changing, and that differs per country because some may assume everyone is working from home, but those who do manual labor, and that's most people in the world, it's a nice idea, but it won't happen. Inequality will be growing is another assumption. Business structures may change, particularly if big tech wins and small businesses disappear due to big tech or due to COVID. And then we see how important supply lines are. And this is, of course, very painful because now we see which countries had that in order and which did not during these incredible times. I think, but that is a personal view, and for everyone this is different, you cannot have a back to normal. We make an assumption that normal exists. It doesn't. We will never go back to the way it was. We will not see any changes in the economy if we do not address healthcare. COVID may be around, or as Andrew says, we may see other forms of this virus. And the more nature and people interact, as more people live on the planet, this is very real. We do also see that we talk a lot about funds, and that's part of it. As the chair of Kappa Build, I also work with the government of Rwanda. Rwanda has done an outstanding job in containing COVID. And it didn't do that with lots of money. It did do that with very strong grassroots movements, grassroots intervention, local governments, tracing, tracking, and containing. That is an incredible achievement the government of Rwanda achieved. Indeed, this picture shows the government of the UK can afford to borrow. That's not the case for many other countries, and these make the choices very difficult. But I come back to the views expressed by Sri Mulyani, and she's very clear what the vision is. Above all, we need a safety net, that everyone gets education, healthcare, and if needed, social security. Second, we need to build our infrastructure. Third, we need to think about our governance in the broadest terms. Those are her 3 pillars, and they're very sound. So the priority is very much focused on people. And that is absolutely the way to go, I believe. And this is the vision she has mapped out for Indonesia, and I think her roadmap is a beautiful one. Not sure if it answered the question because it's such a difficult one, but I hope it helps. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Heij, for the interesting answer. And now we have Prof. John Hutagaol. Pak John. Yeah. Please, Pak,
Okay.
you may join with the presentation.
Thank you, Pak Ferry, Irawan, as moderator for our discussion today. Good morning to everyone, and I hope you are in a perfectly healthy condition today while complying with our recent health protocol. In this opportunity, allow me to greetings my colleagues, Bapak Rahmadi Murwanto, Director of the State's Finance Politeknik STAN, Andrew Auerbach, Senior Tax Advisor of the OECD, who signed in Jakarta, and Professor Gitte Heij, Senior Associate of Asian Law Center of University of Melbourne. In this opportunity, I'm very glad to participate as one of the panelists. I would like to share the topic with regard international taxation in response to the global pandemic of COVID-19, an Indonesian perspective. Okay, please, next slide. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, since its arising at the end of 2019, COVID-19 has been spreading around the world, disrupting everyone's life, in particular our healthy and security. Almost or more than 24 million people in the world are being affected right now, and more than 150,000 Indonesians have been tested positive of the disease. The pandemic has greatly affected our economies, as almost all business sectors are being heavily pressured, leading to the collapse of the global economy. Since the growth figure you can see on the screen has deeply fallen to minus in here, according to International Monetary Funds, minus 8% in the year 2020. Yeah, if you compare to the in here, minus 4.9% in the year 2020, and if we compare to the previous year, so the sliding around 7.8%. If you see the screen, next screen please, next screen. This condition has been confirmed by the economic condition in the 4 countries which has been long been seen as the pillar of the world economy. You see US, United States, for the year 2020 projected minus 8% compared to the previous year, so sliding around more than 10%. And then the second, China, People Republic of China, projected for the 2020 1%, but if you see the first quarter this year, the economic growth sliding to minus 3%. But IMF projected for this year would be positive 1%. But if you compare to the last year, so sliding around more than 5%. Yeah, and then we see the third pillar economy in the world is European Union. See in the screen, minus 10.2%. Yeah, compared to the last year, 2019. So the sliding around more than 11.5%. Then last but not the least is Japan. If you see on the screen, minus 5.8%. So we know Japan is a little bit stable in around 1%, but for this year, they downturned to minus 5.8%. Next slide, please. Global condition has directly affected our domestic economy. Commodities prices has been low. The inception of the social distancing and concern activity in many areas have been lowering down our economic growth, especially in the Q2. If you see on the right side, yeah. It has been projected that our economic growth might be in the range of minus 0.4% to positive 2.3%. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay. If you've seen in the Q2 year 2020, our national economic growth sliding to minus 0.32%. But we're still optimistic in 2020 we will have the good results. Why? Because as you know that the government already implementing the new normal, and the effectiveness of the budget absorption for the National Economic Recovery Program, this might accelerate our economic recovery process in the Q3 and 4. So we expect that in this year, our economy is still controllable. Next slide, please. Ladies and gentlemen, since the pandemic has been declared as a national disaster based on the Presidential Decree number 12 of year 2020, the Indonesian government has launched several economic stimulus. In addition to this economic stimulus, Indonesian government has also issued government regulation in Liu Law number 1 of the year 2020, known as Pukul number 1, which has been passed as law number 2 of the year 2020, and then the governmental regulation number 43 of the year 2020, so as to implement the National Economic Recovery, or we known as Pemulihan Ekonomi Nasional Program. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah. As regard the National Economic Recovery Program, Indonesian government has prepared state budget amounting 695.2 trillion and has distributed into parts as you may see on the screen. Yeah, the government Indonesia already allocated for this program for National Economic Recovery around 695.2 trillions. And if you see, it could be distributed into several categories: social protection, by SME, yeah, business incentive, and also ministry, institution, and regional government, healthcare, funding for the corporates. In total, yeah, 695 trillion rupees. And then if you see, government also carrying on SME, micro, small, medium enterprise. They allocated 17.8% of the total budget. Next slide, please. Ladies and gentlemen, as a part of the economic stimulus, tax instrument with its regulatory function is utilized and implemented, aiming to lessen the taxpayer burden in fulfilling their tax obligation by providing them with administrative relaxation, such as extension deadline, simpler procedure for obtaining tax incentive. What you see on the screen, it is the general policy implemented by the most jurisdiction in the world currently dealing with the COVID-19. Tax incentive have also been given for taxpayer liquidity by providing them with accelerated refund process for the amount of less than 5 billion rupees. So to provide liquidity for the taxpayer, so we expedite the refund process, yeah, with the amount less than 5 billion. Next, please. Additionally, other tax incentive that can be enjoyed: tax exemption, for example, VAT exemption for imports, tax bond by government, such as withholding income tax Article 21 for income from employment, SME final income tax based on governmental regulation number 23 of the year 2018, tax reduction, such as reduce corporate income tax from 25% to 22% for the year 2020-2021, and then lower it to 20% after 2021. In total, if you see on the screen, the amount of the tax incentive has reached around 123.01 trillion rupees. Yeah, on the screen. Yeah, this is the amount of the total tax incentive allocated dealing with COVID-19 pandemic. Yeah, and then those amount has been distributed into several categories. Yeah, if you see government bond income tax Article 21 allocated to 32.2% of the total budget, and then SME incentive for the small medium enterprise, yeah, and also exemption of income tax Article 22 on imports, reduction of income tax Article 25 installment, VAT preliminary refund, corporate income tax reduction, and other reserve and stimulus. So governments care about how dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic disruptive effect. Yeah, so that's why government already allocated for the tax incentive around 123.01 trillion. And we know that tax incentive is a part of economic stimulus package that government already launched this year. Next slide, please. In total, the amount of the tax incentive has reached 123.01 trillion distributed into the several categories. Those tax incentives will remain in place until the end of this year, while we are also evaluating the effectiveness and the benefit of the incentives for taxpayers affected by the pandemic. Based on the evaluation, tax incentive may be kept, revoked, or extended, or maybe modified. Ladies and gentlemen, in order to facilitate tax incentive and relaxation, the Indonesian government has prepared domestic legislation by government regulation in Liu Law number 1, as you see on the screen, year 2020, which has been passed as law number 2 of the year 2020, and has been implementing those policy by issuing regulation, Minister of Finance, degree number 110 of the year 2020, that covering a number of tax incentives such as, next slide please, income tax article 21 bond by the government, SME income tax bond by the government. If you see on the screen, this is the incentive latest regulation that issues to regulate those incentives, yeah, to make ease burden for the taxpayer affected by COVID-19 pandemic. If you see, there is a number of incentive other than the first two that I mentioned earlier. Also, there is exemption of income tax article 22 on imports. Next slide, please. And then see, there is a reduction of income tax article 25 installment. We give a large deduction, previously 30% become 50%, and also VAT preliminary refund, then a government bond final tax on construction services. These all incentive regulated under Minister of Finance regulation number 110. Next slide, please. So we also given a special tax incentive for medical goods and services by issuance Minister of Finance regulation number 28 year 2020. Yeah, if you've seen on the screen, yeah, we given this incentive just to ensure the availability of medical goods and services, yeah, to mitigate the risks arising from COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide, please. And then we also give another tax incentive for the taxpayer by issuance government regulation number 29 year 2020. It is regarding income tax facility in effort to mitigate COVID-19. You see there are 5 different incentive given, granted to the taxpayers. Next. Then we also, a few months ago, issuance the government regulation number 30 year 2020. Yeah, we reduced the corporate income tax from 25% to 22% for started this year until 2021. Yeah, and then for the year 2020 after 2022, we are lowering the corporate income tax become 20%. So this is incentives that we granted to the taxpayer. And also another additional reduced rate we given to the listed companies that meet the qualification under the income tax law. So we given another reduced 3% for them. So a government very caring about the business situation, yeah, and also people affected by the COVID-19 pandemic by utilize the fiscal or the tax instrument, yeah, to handle and to mitigate the risk arising from the COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide, please. Ladies and gentlemen, yeah, most countries or jurisdiction has been communicating with each other by means of international cooperation. International organizations such as OECD, World Bank, IMF, ADB, and Regional Forum of Revenue Administration such as SEGATA, IOTA, SHIAT, ATAF have frequently held discussion via online platform to share information and experience in dealing with the pandemic, while gaining international support to cope with the disruptive effect or impact of the pandemic. As I mentioned, last July, we have to conducted the inclusive framework on BEPS meeting through the online. It is the first time, yeah, that the meeting conducted through the online. And the next meeting, probably in September or October, could be conducted based on the online too. The COVID-19 pandemic surely affected all the agenda in international taxation. For example, like MAP meeting is used to face-to-face meeting, but right now we got difficulties. Only few countries allow us to conduct it through online, but many countries prefer waiting until the COVID-19 pandemic over to conduct it MAP meeting. And many agenda, not only that, for example, like SGATA meeting. SGATA is the South and Pacific Revenue Administration Forum that usually annually meeting, and this year should be in Kyoto, but because of pandemic, so we postpone for the next year. So this is the impact of COVID-19. But not only that, about the regulation also related to the tax treaty and also transfer pricing, APA, and also MAP. Yeah, I think it's very severe effect to international meeting agenda. Ladies and gentlemen, we hope that this pandemic will be over soon by the invention of its vaccine, and we can live our life the way we used to do. Again, thank you very much for your attention for my presentation, and then I return back to my moderator, please.
Thank you, Prof. John Hutagaol, for the very optimistic presentation, I think, for Indonesian government and Indonesian society. And ladies and gentlemen, previously, while we are waiting for Professor John, we have already doing a QA, one question from our participants. Now we are going to continue the Q&A with the following question. Maybe for all of the speaker can answer one by one. This is the question. Let me read the question. So if we are still going to be in the pandemic condition next year or even longer, okay, A, this is part A, would implementing Pillar 1 of BEPS Action 1 amidst the pandemic still be a sound action to make at that time? Is there a chance that, say, the pillar might need to be remade to adjust with this pandemic situation? Okay, this is question from Ade Santi, our students. And then B, and how if no consensus could be reached at the end of 2020? What would be the suggested solution for countries worldwide? And what would be the next agenda from the OECD? Modified, this is the question from Kartika Putri from University of Brawijaya. So we have two questions, maybe can be started from Professor John Hutagaol. To Pak Prof, please. It's still muted, Pak. Maybe you should unmute the audio.
Okay.
Okay.
Clear.
Yeah,
Thank
yes.
you, Pak Ferry. Yeah. Regarding to the Pillar 1, yeah, as you know, of course, COVID-19 pandemic has affect the way we discussion about the pillar one, not only pillar one, but also pillar two. But what I mentioned you earlier, that we have to conducted any discussion in the working parties. I think Andrew already mentioned it. I involved also as a representative of Indonesia in many working parties. Yeah, working party one, working party two regarding to impact assessment, and also working party 6, working party 11 with about a pillar 2. We are discuss it, yeah, until night through the online. Yeah, you know, there is a advantage discussion through online, but also there is a disadvantage. Yeah, pro and cons, because we have to change our mindset and habits. Frequently, we are get used to meeting physically. Yeah, but because of pandemic, social distancing, we have to conduct it through online. So many constraints that we face. Yeah, you know, like lobbying. If we talk about pillar one, we talk about how we dealing with the taxing right. It is very crucial compared to the pillar two. Yeah, how we are dealing with this. Yeah, because you know that we not only discuss about the digital economy aspect alone, but also the conventional economy also touched by the discussion. So that's why we have to be careful to prevent, to defend our taxing rate that we already have in the physical economy or in the conventional economic. But if you talk about the pillar one, we talk about Mon A, Mon B, Mon C. So it's very complex. Yeah, I think Andrew agree with my suggestion. So that's why in Ministry of Finance, we set up a big team, yeah, comprising of Digitex official and also Fiscal Policy Bureau. So we work together, yeah, to have a similar position on behalf of Minister of Finance Indonesia. So that's why if you asking what's the impact, yeah, there is some impact because of COVID-19 pandemic. However, we will see the discussion in the next or in the coming the inclusive framework on BEPS could be conducted around September, if I'm not wrong, Andrew. Yeah, yeah. We will see how the discussion, if there any conclusion, it's good. Yeah, because most of inclusive framework members hope that the global consensus, pillar one, pillar two, one package would be reached in by the end of this year. But however, again, because we talk about how to divide, how to share taxing right, so it's not only we talk about the taxation aspect or treatment, but also we talk about the political agenda in this discussion. Not easy, I think, yeah, compared to the pillar two. Pillar two, we talk about the global anti-BEPS. I think it is commonly no differences amongst the members, because we are in the same boat at the pillar two, but in the pillar one, again, we have to patient, yeah, and then struggling to achieve that. So the next question, how if the global consensus not reached in this year? So again, we have a gentleman agreement between amongst of the inclusive framework members for the VAT or indirect tax. Yeah, they encourage to implement, to collect VAT from digital economy transaction, because there is no issue of double taxation. Yeah, but however, for income tax, yeah, not suggested to implement, but not prohibited to execute. So if you see, however, we are in the process of gaining or reach a global consensus, we see that some of members already conducted individual measures, such as like France, yeah, for example, Austria, yeah, UK, yeah, and some countries they already issued initiative measures, yeah, to preserve their taxing right. But we have a same commitment since we reached the global consensus. So initiative measures should be dropped and follow the global consensus or multilateral convention that will be reached by this year. So I think that's all my comment regarding to the question. Thank you. Return back to the moderator.
Thank you, Prof. John. It's very enlightening answer, actually. And maybe we can go to Professor Heij. Dr. Gitte, please.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it's okay. It's very
Okay. I think a few things. We make an assumption what Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 may do for Indonesia. Right now, I do not know if it's good news or not such good news for Indonesia. It's very difficult to calculate how much benefit Indonesia will have from the introduction of Pillar 1 and Pillar 2, because not all the data is available. So we make an assumption that it's good news. We also make an assumption that logic will prevail. But as Pak John said so rightly, it's political. This is not about the technical details. It's about politics. We may make an assumption that Joe Biden will be more sensible than Donald Trump. That's highly unlikely because Joe Biden will defend the tech industry in his country the same way Barack Obama did. That means that a consensus is very unlikely to be achieved. The alternative is 10 times worse. Everyone agrees on that, but that doesn't mean logic prevails. So there is definitely a thinking that it may reach agreement. It's very likely it will not. What will the Global South do? How can they put more pressure on this? India is really muscling in, and I think that's fantastic from a political viewpoint, and I'm not a political scientist, but to see how countries who previously may not have had that much power now see increasing power and exercise their rights. And that is very positive. Thank you.
okay. Thank you, Professor Heij. And Pak Andrew, you can answer the question, please. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think there's obviously a lot of things to take into account and try and balance here. I mean, first of all, you know, let's get to an agreement first before we talk about the timing of Pillar 1, Pillar 2. We still got a long way to go there. And, you know, people are more or less optimistic about whether that's going to be possible or not. I think, though, I mean, the question asks, is this the right time? And I think if we can get to agreement, yes, it is the right time. And it's the right time both because, you know, look, we see a lot of tech, you know, digital companies benefiting greatly from the situation, the current situation, and in circumstances where revenue is very tight, you know, maximizing the taxing power for those companies, particularly for emerging markets, for developing countries, will be very, very important. But second of all, you know, the consequences of no agreement and a rise of unilateral measures will almost certainly bring with it the rise of retaliatory measures and tariffs, and we already see the U.S. Trade Representative launching investigations, including in Indonesia's case, and so those actions. I mean, I think we can predict if there are unilateral measures, there will be unilateral retaliatory measures as well. And so, you know, as well as measuring the benefit of Pillar 1 for Indonesia or any other country, you also have to measure the kind of counterfactual, well, what if we don't get agreement? What will that cost? What will a DST bring in revenue? What will it cost in terms of trade or uncertainty or what have you for multinationals? So there are a lot of things there. I mean, I think I want to touch a little bit on the corporate tax. I know Professor Heij mentioned it a couple of times about kind of the end of corporate tax, and I think that's something that people should think about, or particularly think about the role of the corporate tax and what it means. And it's not a monolithic thing. In OECD countries, oh, and I have to correct Professor Heij. There are not 36 members of the OECD. We're 37 now. Colombia is officially a member, so we're getting more and more inclusive at the council level. But corporate tax for OECD countries is fairly, you know, a modest amount of overall tax revenue. It's about 9 or 10% of total tax revenue. But for developing countries, emerging markets, particularly developing countries, a much higher reliance on corporate tax revenue, you know, up to 30, 40% in some countries. And so the variable for different countries and different economies is much, much different. So if you talk about the end of corporate tax in the UK or Canada, well, that's one thing. The end of corporate tax in Nigeria or Kenya is something completely different. And so how that balances out and what it's replaced with is a real concern. But in that regard, like, I mean, I think, and some people have asked about, well, you know, if we have to, you know, relieve tax to keep the economy going, but we got to collect more revenue to pay debt. What do we do? It's an impossible conundrum, and it is, you know, pay for healthcare, pay for all these things. I mean, I think that one of the great benefits of the international tax work over the last decade, and the benefit that the G20's focus on transparency and cooperation has brought to all countries, OECD member, non-OECD member, is the ability to collect taxes wherever taxpayers keep their money. I mean, 10 years ago, when I joined the OECD, the idea that you were going to get bank information from Switzerland was a fantasy. I mean, it just was not on the horizon. And today, you know, Switzerland, Singapore, Panama, Hong Kong exchange information all over the world, and Indonesia is a great beneficiary of that under automatic exchange of information. And our latest numbers say that countries have exchanged information on 84 million financial accounts with an account value of over 10 trillion euros, which is, it's a big number no matter how you cut it. And I think so maximizing the ability of jurisdictions to tax capital, whether that's through corporate tax or through direct taxes on shareholders, has changed considerably. And I think countries are going to have to look forward to exploiting these abilities to tax things more and more, you know, as the reliance on corporate tax, whether it goes away or it's diminished. I mean, Pak John just showed us how the corporate rate in Indonesia is falling. It's falling all over the world. So we're going to have to pick that up, and the more we can track capital around the world, I think it's better for all countries. So I hope we get agreement. We always have in the past, but if we don't, I mean, I think countries are going to have to prepare for the chaos that people have talked about. And I think personally that if there is chaos, that countries will be driven back to the table, but it will take some time. And in 3, 4, 5 years, MNEs will say, we can't do this. We can't do business in this environment. We need a global consensus. So let's try again. But there are many possible futures.
Okay, thank you for the answer and the explanations. To our distinguished speakers and also the participants, since we have a very limited time, so maybe we cannot answer all of the questions that come to us, but I believe that if all speakers don't mind, maybe we will send a question. Is it okay? Question from the participants, and then through the email, and maybe Prof. John and Prof. Heij and also Pa Andrew can answer if it's okay. So maybe for our discussion today, I have a very, plenty of conclusion that actually I can say or I can deliver, but maybe there are only two for all of the answer and question from our today fruitful discussion. First is, we know that the situations during the pandemic is not easy, and we haven't experience with that, but we have to be optimistic with the situation. The government, all of the countries have already conducted to tackle the situation. But also, on the other hand, we have also to be realistic and also prepare alternatives way out, as Professor Gitte said. So we have also to consider the alternative policy that should be taken by all of the tax authority, especially. And those can be achieved if we can work together. I think that is the conclusion for our today's discussion. Thank you to all our distinguished speakers, Professor John Hutagaol, Professor Gitte, and Mr. Andrew Auerbach, and also the participants. We are very sorry if there is a technical obstacle or situations here. And I return to the field.
Okay. Thank you so much, Pa Ferry. Now we come to the last session of this webinar, and it has been our pleasure to host this event. We hope this webinar can bring a lot of benefit for all of us. Represent the committee as the Master of Ceremony today. We would like once again say thank you very much to the distinguished speaker guests today, Mr. Andrew, Ms. Heij, dan Bapak John. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your time and attention joining this webinar. Hope you all have a pleasant day and stay healthy. Thank you. Wabillahi taufiq wa hidayat. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, everyone.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.